Have you ever thought of the operating principles of nature and what promotes nature to be so successful in evolution? Could it be the case that those operating principles are very much a part of our life if we only subscribe to them?
This is the Home of Healthspan podcast, where we profile health and wellness role models, sharing their stories and the tools, practices, and routines they use to live a lively life.
Ric, it is wonderful to have you on the show, and especially because I get to look at this beautiful background, class outside today, it looks like. But before we get into where you are, why you're there, everything you do, how would you describe yourself?
Well, firstly, Andrew, it's a pleasure to be here and to be on your podcast. And, when I think about myself and what I've accomplished over the years, I would say I remain a very lively visionary. And that's my first and foremost, role in this, I think. Visionary who is passionate about the plants and about the soil in which our food and medicine come from, and about the connections that we all share, and the connections that we make, and the connections that we keep. And right now I would say I'm a steward of regenerative life. And what does it mean to be living a life regenerated? And to me it means a lot of things, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that on the broadcast today. But I think that's really defining who I am.
Yeah. And I mean, for those not familiar, right? Founder Gaia, amazing, sold that. But then I think to what you're doing today, that plays into where you are and why you're there. So could you share a little bit about where you are? What is this beautiful background, and how and why are you there? And how did you get into that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I'm in Costa Rica, and where I live, and I also have a regenerative organic certified farm where we grow about 12 medicinal plants that we now use in our new product line, Kokora. My journey was founding Gaia and leading Gaia to quite a successful outcome in over 30 years of time. And then, when that journey ended, I started a new journey, and that was first to establish an institute for botanical research, which we did at the naturopathic college that I went to in Arizona. And then we started this organic farm, and then became Regenerative Organic. And now we're really building up this whole message of what it is to live a regenerative life, and how do we build that into healthy products that we can consume, and what does that mean? So the journey continues, and I'm really happy to continue on it.
I mean, that's a term of art, a regenerative life. How would you define that or describe that for someone who might not be as familiar?
Yeah, well, it's a life. How do we view nature as a whole? What is this intelligence in nature that is at work with evolution and coevolution, and of people, plants, and and all the things that are part of life on Earth? And regenerative life means a co-participant, being in harmony with that, being in harmony with the environment. And have you ever thought, and I'm asking this to the audience here, have you ever thought of the operating principles of nature and what promotes nature to be so successful in evolution? And could it be the case that those operating principles are very much a part of our life if we only subscribe to them? And so, my journey has been to really observe what these operating principles are, and to adopt them into my life firstly, and then into the life of my new company, Kokora.
Okay, amazing. So I would love to, do you have a set list of, hey, here are these core principles that do come into play and that I have now built my life and my business and serving people around?
I do, and they're really an extension, firstly, of the naturopathic principles, that we learned in naturopathic college. The first one is the vis medicatrix naturae, which is the Latin name for the healing power of nature, and recognizing that nature has an organizing power, nature has an organizing wisdom, and in that power, in that wisdom, life is orchestrated. So that's one thing. And then the second one is primum non nocere. And primum non nocere means first, do no harm. And if you observe nature, everything is evolutionary, and it takes care of its, the total creation. And, how we bring that into business is making business choices, business decisions that are definitely part of, a progressive outcome. Then the next two are tolle causum and tolle totum. Treat the cause and treat the whole person. And I'm sure your listeners are very, aligned to that. And, when you make business decisions, you want to make decisions that are aligned to supporting your employees, supporting the well-being of your employees, and supporting the totality of the business rather than one simple decision that might, make more money, for example. And the fourth and fifth ones are docere, and docere means teacher as leader. How many leaders and executives and CEOs show up as a teacher for their organization rather than just a boss? The sixth one is preventare, practice prevention. And, how important is that for us to, assume a role in our business, in our life that we are preventing? We talk about all the things we get involved in, maybe like social connections, wellness practices, things like that. How do we realize and connect with them in a way that shows that they are truly preventative?
I'd really like to dig in on that last one, especially. So as I understand it, in the United States, 1 in every 3 tax dollars is spent on healthcare, which is actually sick care, right? We're not historically investing in proactive health. We're doing reactionary sick. And of that 1 in every $3, 80% of it goes to treating conditions that are preventable and or reversible with lifestyle changes, dietary and lifestyle changes. And so as you think of building this regenerative life and business and impacting others, what role does the preventative part play in the things that you create and bring to market?
Well, when you talk about a regenerative life, and, there are so many different aspects that we participate in life, and how do we, create a lifestyle that is truly progressive and preventative, progressive in a way that it's aligned to the organizing power of nature, and preventative in a way that avoids the kind of the conflicts and confusion and selfishness of society. And, I think this is important because we have a choice we can make. We can choose to be aligned to the operating principles of nature. We can choose, to really observe and participate in a regenerative life. I think that's important.
And on the regenerative, so one thing that's come up a few different times on this show with prior guests is things around supplements. So when we think about nutrition, hey, what is your nutrition profile? And whether you're carnivore, you're omnivore, you're vegan or whole food plant, right? They're all different flavors. And then the question becomes, okay, great. Are you getting all the nutrients you expect and want from that, or are you having to supplement? And a lot of times people say, ideally, I would be getting it from my foods. But because we've depleted the soil so much, almost regardless of what my dietary profile is, I can't get enough magnesium because the soil is depleted and it's not coming through in the foods that I'm able to access and purchase. And so I guess, how do you think about that? Like nutritionally, how do you approach how you fuel your body?
Having been a student now of regenerative farming, regenerative agriculture for many years, I have become really subscribed to the truth that we probably have enough nutrition in our soils to provide us and provide our foods for thousands of years. And I know that's a pretty bold statement, but the problem today is our foods, our plants are growing in soil that is no longer alive. And so the soil food web has been destroyed by agricultural practices. And what I mean by the soil food web is the myriad of fungi, bacteria, protozoa, earthworms, other nematodes that all work in orchestration to create the proper environment to enable plants, the roots of plants, to access that nutrition. So when we talk about the soil food web, Andrew, it's all about how do we participate in our growing practices with nutrient cycling, and to do that it requires participating with the soil food web that I just mentioned.
That makes a lot of sense. But for you personally, I mean, how do you fuel your body kind of day to day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I try to participate in eating foods that I know are grown healthy, organically, and perhaps regeneratively. Now I'm participating in developing a brand that is, essentially founded on regenerative agriculture, which means that the microbiome of these herbs that we're using is present in the nutrients that we are taking. So that's going to enrich my biome, my microbiome. So I'm really, really very conscious of that now in terms of the choices that we make or that I'm making for my foods. But it doesn't stop there. It's all about the things that you and your show are all about as well, in terms of how do we sustain our social connections? How do we participate in wellness and ensure that we move properly throughout the day? What is a regenerative life? You mentioned health span and lifespan. What does that really mean with respect to a regenerative life?
Well, I mean, let's double click on the movement, right? So I was listening to an Andrew Huberman podcast today where Michael Easterly, the Comfort Crisis author, was talking about this idea of gyms or post-industrial age, right? The idea that you needed to go inside some room to go move your body is new in human history, because historically you would just go move your body and it's how you work. And so I see you're outside as we're recording this. You have a regenerative farm. So what is your movement practice? I mean, is it, hey, I get it in life. My life is a life of movement. Or do you add other things to build on top of that?
Yeah, I do. However, I do subscribe to the fact that, in longevity cultures, which I have been, going to some of the blue zones over the last 3 years, documenting their lives. Those people didn't go and have an exercise regime. And, they didn't work out at a gym and they didn't lift weights. They walked uphill a long ways to go to church, or they farmed, they moved around all day, and they kneeled, they squatted, they practiced flexibility of their joints. And so for me, that's a big part of it, keeping the body active. And, walking is a really important part. For me, every day I add pool exercises. I do water jogging. I do this, very expansive breaststroke in the pool while jogging to open up this energy here. I do a lot of Qigong. I do a lot of specific yogic practices. But I think that's secondary to just keeping the body active. And one of the reasons, Andrew, I'm keeping my office outside is so I can give my eyes a break, pretty frequently from the computer screen, and look into nature where I can offset some of these EMFs that I'm exposed to.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the gym culture is a more recent phenomenon, but in the long arc of human history, the concept of inside is also a relatively recent phenomenon. Like, there were no buildings, we didn't have windows and everything. If you think about going back 250,000 years, we were out moving in nature. That is the natural state. Another one you brought up is social connection. So you visited and studied these kind of blue zone areas, these longevity cultures. You have relocated down to Costa Rica. How do you think about the deliberate investment or cultivation of social connection for you? And what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it means a lot of things, in terms of how we are spending time with, healthy, uplifting conversations with others, how we are spending time creating meals with others, consuming meals with others. Is it life supporting? How do we help others, and how do others help us in our life's journey? It's about being kind and compassionate with others, to others. And, others, the quote, others are a big part of people that I observed in the blue zone, because they have family, they have friends, they have the connections that sustain them. And I observe them, watch them, talk with them. One of the most recent questions that I asked a couple of centenarians last summer in Italy was, what do they think are the real reasons for their longevity? And you know what the answer was? Is they both came back, husband and wife, that they do not fret over mental or emotional stress. They don't allow that to infiltrate their life. And, how much stress, anxiety, and emotional tension can we take up in social connections? They just don't allow that to be invited into their life. They created a life where it's life supporting that way in social connections.
Yeah, I mean, that bleeds very perfectly to the pillar of stress management. And you talked about some yogic practices and qigong. Do you have deliberate breath work you do, whether it's daily or in certain situations? Stress is inevitable, right? I guess maybe put it another way. Things that can be stressful in life are inevitable. How we decide to respond or react is not inevitable. That is something I guess we get to shape and decide on over time. And so as you talk to these people, as you learn this, hey, we just decided we're not going to get stressed. The best one I've heard, which is much harder in the moment than in theory, is when you're in an argument, ask yourself, will this matter in 10 years?
Yeah.
And almost never is the answer yes. Whatever you're actually going on, no, whatever we're talking about, there's zero chance I will remember what we're even talking about in 10 years. So why am I investing all this angst and emotion into it? So how do you think about stress management, having learned that from these centenarians?
It's a great question for me, Andrew. I've spent quite a lot of time studying the work of Hans Selye, who you probably know, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on stress and adaptation. And, I always run this by me in life. The statement that he wrote about was, there is no stressful situation in life, only a stressful response. How we respond to stress determines its impact upon us. So what we have to cultivate is the adaptation practice. How are we adapting to the stress of life? And for me, I have all these practices. I wake up and I spend my first 2 hours of my morning, minimizing the impact of stress. And, I do breathing exercises. I do the Uddiyana Bandha. I do tapping, which is a longevity practice to help clear stagnation in the body. I make a key point in my, we have a team of 10 people now at Kokora, and we meet every day on the remotely. And my practice as a leader is more of a teacher, docere. And in that space, I can be a simple servant to all of the people. I can be a visionary, I can be a teacher, I can guide them, and I can do it with kindness and compassion. And in that way, I'm choosing to build social connections that are harmonious.
Yeah, which changes how you respond to certain situations. It changes the valence, I guess, of those situations to make them stressful or not. You just brought up another one of the principles in the regenerative life that I wanted to come back to one before, of the first do no harm. And I think of when you talk about stress and hormesis, that we know a plant, say a tomato plant, that has experienced stress, had drought, is more nutrient rich than one just grown perfectly, always had the perfect water, et cetera, right? That there's a benefit to stress. So you say do no harm, it might also be the time horizon. Because when you go exercise, your blood pressure goes up, your glucose spikes, all these things. It could look like you're doing harm to your body, but what you're really doing is making your body adaptive. And when you talk about the principles of nature, it's not that you don't react whatever, it's that you can adapt to the situation. And so it seems like stress, the right kind of stress, can be critical and essential to be able to prepare for that kind of adaptation. How do you think about that?
I agree. There's either distress or eustress. Stress is the stress that, causes, puts a negative impact on adaptation. And eustress, uplifts, your energy and allows you to be, much, much more, healthful. But I really do think that, our stressful situations in life can be managed if we make a conscious effort to manage adaptation. I really do feel that way.
Yeah. And I guess for listeners, eustress is EU, stress, right? Like that's,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One thing we haven't really touched on, we're talking about this vibrancy, vitality, the social connection, the stress management, the fueling our body, moving. What about the sleep and recovery side? So it comes in waves. You can't always be doing and moving and going. How do you think about resting your mind or body or your sleep? I mean, are you very much on natural circadian cycle? Like I see you put your office outside. I mean, you try to stick to natural light and natural rhythms. How do you look at that part of your life?
Yeah, it's a challenge in today's world because we're bringing into sleep so many influences. The EMFs we're bringing, the influences of our social connections, and we're bringing in influences of the food we eat, the time we have eaten that food in proximity to sleep. We're bringing in influences of so many factors. Impurities in our environment, environmental disruptors are all potentially there to disrupt sleep. And it's not, surprising that we see problems with sleep latency and sleep maintenance. How many of your people in your audience have problems falling asleep, which is sleep latency, and how many have problems, which is staying asleep, which is sleep maintenance? And I find today more people are having problems staying asleep. That 1 to 3 a.m. hour of the morning is a critical hour for metabolism, for cortisol, and for adrenal function, and for liver function. And a lot of people are having sleep disruption during this time of the night, and thus disrupting a good sound, restful sleep with proper REM sleep and proper deep sleep.
Yeah. And so I guess for you personally, what is your sleep? I mean, do you try to stick to a more consistent bedtime and wake time, or like what is your sleep hygiene? And
Well, I'm going to tell you, for me, it's a little different than a lot of
okay.
people because I do live in Costa Rica and we have constant 12-hour cycles of light and darkness. So it gets
Yeah.
dark here at 6 o'clock, and I am falling tired by 8:30, and I'm usually in bed before 9 p.m.
Yeah.
8:30, 9 p.m. So because I'm a naturally early riser, and the sun, it starts to get light out at 4:30 in the morning, and when it does, I'm up. So I need to be sure that I'm getting to bed early and have this proper cycle aligned to the cycle of nature. And how many people really are aware how important that is?
Yeah, I would encourage a lot of people to think through when they start feeling tired, because I would have this problem in college. I was a swimmer. We'd have 2 practices a day. I'd be exhausted right after dinner, right? So because I was so sleep deprived, I could have gone to bed at 8, but you had homework. And by 10:30, I kind of got in the second wind, and I don't know, it's something evolutionary. Then it was really hard to fall asleep. No matter how tired I was at 8, by 10:30, it was really difficult. And so I think there are a lot of people, I couldn't possibly go to bed at this time. Just maybe spend some more time noticing when you start yawning and feeling tired. Because I have all these people say, I stay up till 11 or midnight or whatever. But I can be with them, and at 8:45, they're very tired. They just refuse to acknowledge what their body is telling them.
I think if you live a healthy, active lifestyle during the day, it's natural. When the cycles of nature start to fall asleep, you'll see that. You'll see it in the declining singing of the sounds of nature from, the little creatures in nature. They'll subside. You'll see it in how the plants are starting to kind of show their restful cycle later in the day and into the evening. So all of nature is falling asleep by 6 p.m., and frankly, we want to tend to eat our biggest meal in the day at 6, 7, 8 p.m., which is contrary to sleep cycle.
Yeah. And this is where these pillars can at times rub against each other, because depending on where you are culturally, like if you're in Spain and dinner's typically at 10 p.m., but you have the circadian rhythm, like how do you balance that social connection? That's when a lot of socializing happens. And they're just, I don't know if there's any one path, right? Like you're in Costa Rica, you're on this, you don't get the seasons in the same way with the light. And so you have this beautiful, consistent sleep. But in northern climates, I've been in Iceland December 21st, where it gets dark at 3:30 p.m. versus in the summer where it's not ever dark. You're dealing with totally different things. you're clearly a student of this as well as a teacher, right? You've looked a lot and you've studied it, Ayurvedic, all the different elements, and you've chosen to now build Kokora for a reason, and you have a certain product line for a reason. It's deliberate, it's thoughtful. What is it that you're looking to provide to people with the products that you currently have out?
Yeah, Andrew, that's a great question, because that is the reason why I started Kokora. There is a crisis happening in our food system today. There is a crisis happening in our medicine system today. And I believe that crisis has emerged because of the crisis in our soil systems. We have, sequentially destroyed the very life in our soils from conventional agriculture. Agrochemicals, all of these, environmental disruptors that have gone into our soil and into our water have literally created nutrient deficient foods. And I've seen it work. I have literally used my farm as a beautiful experiment. We have an agronomist who's, capturing everything through the microscope and taking records of all of the different aspects of the soil food web. We are witnessing how quickly soils can become transformed in our regenerative practices. And we are witnessing the changes in nutrient density in the plants that we are growing. I'll give you one example, Andrew. In turmeric, from converting organic to regenerative organic, the nutrient density of turmeric measured by the curcuminoids, the active principles in turmeric, went from 2.5% to 8.5% in 1 year.
Wow.
That's about a 4-fold increase in nutrient density. We saw the same with holy basil, Tulsi. And this coincides with the work that Rodale Institute is doing with universities like University of Pennsylvania, measuring how legumes, the nutrient density in legumes is much higher through regenerative agriculture. So one of the reasons why I'm starting this journey of Kokora is to really expound upon what we can do through regenerative agriculture for our biome, for our microbiome, for the totality of our body. And because regenerative agriculture is all about sequestering carbon and creating an environment that sequesters carbon, what are we doing for the environment? About a month ago, I was in El Salvador, and I was invited there by the government. And the government has an interest there to convert all farming practices in El Salvador to regenerative organic. So they invited me there to come and make a presentation about how can they do this. And I was honored to do that. And they are very serious about, on a national scale, about introducing regenerative agriculture. Same thing is going on here in Costa Rica. And we're seeing, a path towards adopting these practices. So for me, Kokora is a venue for building this narrative. It's a venue for bringing out products that have this vitality in them, that have the blueprint of all this microbiome of nature, and that can really enrich and enliven our physiologies back to a state of wellness.
That's incredible. And I know our listeners are grateful for not just Kokora, but Gaia. I mean, your whole journey and career and dedication to helping people with all of this, because very few people can be their full-time job, right? It's a priority, but it has to fit into work and family and all these other pieces, and they can't do the research. They can't dedicate their lives to it to the extent that you have and do. And so thank you for being a perpetual student, and thank you for being a perpetual teacher as well. And thank you for coming on the show, Ric.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. I'm really happy to talk with you about it.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Home of Healthspan podcast. And remember, you can always find the products, practices, and routines mentioned by today's guests, as well as many other Healthspan role models on alively.com. Enjoy a lively day.